Human is about sharing stories of life, faith and humanity. And each evening this week, I've been interviewing different individuals and they've been sharing parts of their story. And then we've been hearing from Mark about a story that Jesus told. And tonight, for the final night, I'm so excited to be interviewing Sophie. Sophie was a student here in Durham, and she came to an event just like this 2 years ago. And we're going to hear part of her story tonight. So let's give a warm welcome to Sophie. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you.
You were a Durham student. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Tell us your statistics.
Yeah, so I was in College. I was studying Biomedical Science. Did a year. I was here 2 years ago, so I would be third year now, but we'll get onto that bit. But yeah, Collingwood Biomed.
Nice. And how did you find Durham? Where are you from?
I live near Oxford. Found Durham great, loved the city, long way from home, so I think I was quite homesick in the first term, but I had a great group of friends on my corridor, I enjoyed Durham.
And you just mentioned it, you stayed for a year and then you left and you now have a job. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I enjoyed Durham, but I wasn't necessarily enjoying my course. I went in enjoying biomed, but then kind of changed my mind, didn't think that biomed was something that I wanted to study long term, and couldn't think of what else I wanted to study. And I think at the end of first term I was as well, still a little bit unsettled, not sure what I wanted to do long term. So at that point I applied for a job, applied for an apprenticeship, and so by Easter time in my first year, I was offered that job, which I'm now doing. And it's a tax apprenticeship, so that's always a bit of a conversation stopper. But but no, I am actually really enjoying it. It's like fun side of tax.
Sounds thrilling. So I'm going to chat a little bit about your Durham time in a bit, but I want to start just going back to pre-Durham days. Your childhood growing up, what was that like?
Yeah, it was great. So I had a really good childhood. So I've got a twin sister, grew up with her, my mum, my dad. Really loving, supportive family. We travelled a lot, so I got to see a lot of places when I was younger. I just had a family that really kind of supported me and pushed me to be the best I could be. Enjoyed primary school, I loved school, but I think by the time I got to GCSE A-level kind of stage, I was thinking about kind of who I was, where I fit into friendship groups, and I think at that stage I was have my group of friends, but trying to work out who I was, so maybe trying to go spend time with different groups of people and see if I could really relate to any of them. But at that stage, I was a real people pleaser. So I think I was just very agreeable with everybody. I never had an argument with anyone. I just wanted to please everyone, but that didn't help me work out who I was. And I think I was probably quite shy at that stage, but still really invested in school. So I knew that school was something that if I put the hard work in, then I could get the grades, and that was kind of where my identity was. I was the person, if I worked really hard, then that was where I could find my satisfaction. Every good grade I got, that was what I was aiming for. And I think with a school and a family that was encouraging me to get good grades, go to a good uni, get a good degree, get a good job, earn lots of money, and be completely self-sufficient, kind of world is your oyster type thing. That was the goal, but there was the kind of thought that if I don't get the next grade, then I've got so much holding on my final A levels. What if I miss them? And then kind of if I'm not that person who's the clever one who gets the good job, then kind of what's my purpose then? So that was kind of a big time of trying to work out kind of who I was, where I was at.
And at this age, did you have any understanding of faith? Did you know anyone who had a faith?
No, so I didn't grow up in a Christian family. Didn't really know any Christians. I went to a C of E primary school, so heard stories about Jesus, and just kind of viewed him as a storybook character. I didn't really know anyone with a faith, so Jesus wasn't in my life then.
So if at that age, as a teenager, I was to ask you, who is Jesus to you, what do you think you would have said?
I think I would have maybe said that I didn't know, or I might have tried to come up with like an intellectual answer and be like, oh, because like learning in RE, or Jesus is the Son of God, but wouldn't have had any significance to me at all.
And so then you go through your teenage years, you come to Durham, and 2 years ago, pretty much to the day, you're at an event just like this.
Yeah.
How did you feel about coming?
I came to this event 2 years ago, the student event. I had a friend on my corridor that had been asking me to come along to every event all week. And I was like, no, I've got summatives, I've got too much work to do, I'm not coming along. Actually, we were speaking yesterday about what I was like before like coming to Story, and my friend was just telling me how I was just obsessed with work. Like, he said, do you remember how many notes you used to write? So for every hour lecture, I used to write 2 hours of notes. Wow, and Biomed was like a 20 hours of lectures a week. I just write so many notes in like loads of different colours. And yeah, so coming here, I was like, is it going to be worth my time? I'm going to be putting work to one side. And it was mainly because my friend had been asking me to come along all week. So I was kind of like, fine, I'll come to the last one. There's free food. So that's how I felt coming.
And how did you find it when you were here?
So the student speaking, he was like clever on another level. He was a complete genius, got so many A-levels, and I think I related to his story in how he found his identity in Jesus, his identity in his grades, and how he was always looking for the next, like passing the next exam, and that was, his next goal. And then heard about how his life changed when he heard about Jesus, and just what a massive difference that made to his life. And I think it was something that I hadn't really heard about before. Christianity to me at that point was, if you're a Christian, it means you were born into a Christian family, therefore you're a Christian. Muslims, I thought, just born into a Christian family, therefore a Muslim. And I was not born into a religious family, and therefore I wasn't religious. So I hadn't really had any other thoughts about Christianity. And now here's this guy saying, like, this completely changed my life, changed my outlook on life. So I guess I wanted to find out a bit more. I wasn't like, oh, I want to be a Christian. I was keeping a diary at the time, and I remember reading back just recently, and I wrote on that night, like, oh, it was quite an interesting talk. Talked about Christianity. I'm not going to become a Christian or anything. Like, I think I was trying to like tell myself, don't get carried away.
And this person of Jesus that you heard about when you came to the evening, did you have any understanding that he was real or relevant to your life?
No. No, at that point, I didn't think he was real. I didn't think he was relevant to me. I thought there might be some more relevance to other people's lives than I'd once thought. But I could tell that it was important because of how emotional he got when he was talking about Jesus and what kind of knowing Jesus was like. So I knew it was a big thing, and I think because of my like the way that my brain was working, I didn't want to make a decision having not known all the facts, but so I kind of knew at the time why I wasn't a Christian, but there seemed like all these reasons why someone would be a Christian that I didn't know. So I didn't want to go away and be like, oh, I'm not a Christian, without knowing the reasons for being a Christian. So I think, at that time I just really wanted loads of information. So I was asking loads of questions.
And what do you think changed in that evening? Obviously, nothing fully changed. You still left with lots of questions. What was it in that evening that you look back and feel like happened?
So there wasn't like a big life-changing moment. Nothing radically changed. I think, like I said, I had this now interest that I wanted to find out what Christianity was. It was more of like an intellectual interest rather than anything too major or life-changing.
So this is on the Friday, and then on the Sunday you decide to go to church. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I thought, so my friend invited me along to church, and I thought it seemed like the next logical step to go and see what church was like. It was not what I expected at all. I expected hard pews and old-fashioned hymns that I wouldn't know what the words meant. But it was kind of, everybody was so welcoming. It was kind of really bright, and it wasn't hymns, it was more like songs that I understood the words to. There was a sermon. I remember asking what church would be like before I went, and my friend's like, there's going to be a sermon. And I said, what's a sermon? And it's just like where they read a passage from the Bible and then just say what it means. So there's me thinking, like, the Bible's a really kind of old historical book. How can that be relevant to our life? But what the guy was saying at church, I think he was talking about forgiveness, and I could just really relate bits to my life and think, oh yeah, like maybe there's people that I haven't forgiven that I should forgive. And just I think the other main thing was the relationship that people had with each other. They just seemed to have a deeper relationship than any like friendships I'd seen before. Not like non-judgmental and just really caring about one another. So yeah, like really enjoyed church, and I didn't think I would.
And so you go to church, and then you're invited to something called Christianity Explored. Do you want to tell us, for those who don't know what that is and what happened? Yeah, so Christianity Explored was a 4-week course looking through the Gospel of Mark, so looking through an account of Jesus' life. And it was just, we'd have a meal, sit around tables and like read and just ask any questions we wanted to. And at the start of those 4 weeks, I said, I'm going to go to the 4 weeks, and at the end of the course, I'm going to weigh up the pros and cons of being a Christian and make my decision then, like based on whether there's more pros or more cons. So in the first few weeks, we were looking at kind of who Jesus was, seeing that he wasn't just an ordinary guy. He performed miracles and, just looking at the story of his life. And then in the third week, we were looking at the cross, so how Jesus died on the cross. And so around my table, there was people talking about what it meant to them, describing how Jesus was nailed to the cross and went through this unimaginable pain and separation from his Father. And they were just saying how the reason for it was because he loved them. He was dying for them. And I think just their honesty and seeing how much that impacted them made me realise that actually it's not just like a small decision. They're living for Jesus. Their whole kind of life revolves around Jesus. So yeah, it's it was definitely something that was becoming less, I needed to know all the answers, and more kind of an emotional response, like a, wow, like what if this is true? And they talked a bit more about sin, so the way that we turn our backs on God, the way that we reject God. And I was sat there thinking, since I've been born, I haven't looked towards God, I haven't like known him. And so I've been rejecting him up until now, and talking about how our sin, because it's rejection of God, and because he's a just God, because he's fair, so he's going to punish those who are turning away from him. But then describing that when Jesus died on the cross, he kind of took all of that, our rejection of God and our turning away from him, onto himself, and took our place, so took our punishment for us. I think that's probably the point that it became more real for me, which is a bit scary. I was kind of, I felt then that it was real, that I believed Jesus went to like that length to die on the cross so that I wouldn't have to go through that punishment. And I couldn't really understand like that kind of scale of love, because I didn't deserve it at all. Like I had done nothing to deserve that love. So then I knew I had to make a decision, like knowing that I could either kind of carry on living for myself
doing what I wanted to do, which would have been probably the easier way forward because it was what I was used to. Or I could kind of take a step into the unknown, which it was because I knew that I believed this was true, but there was so much I didn't know at that point. But I think knowing Jesus' death and what that means and his love for me, that's the night that I decided to accept kind of his love and his offer for his love for me.
What did it look like for you to accept that?
So after the Christianity Explored, friend that brought me along, we went and we prayed. So we just it was just like a saying, sorry God, that I've turned away from you until now. Thank you for dying for me. Thank you for showing me this love, even though I don't deserve it. And please help me to accept that. And please, accept me. I think, it was just that kind of talking to God and just acknowledging that this is the way I wanted to go forward, living my life in light of what Jesus has done for me.
Obviously, you're not brought up with any faith or no one around you's got faith, so it's all very new. How did you feel about making that decision? Did it feel big at the time?
Yeah, it did feel like a big decision. I think I didn't understand, maybe how big it was at the time. I knew that it was going to mean that I'm going to live my life differently, but I think that's kind of unfolded over time, like the different ways that I'm going to now live differently, knowing Jesus than I did before. But yeah, it felt big at the time, and I think I didn't sleep that night at all. I was excited. I was kind of waiting, like in anticipation what it would mean the next day, waking up as a Christian. And I read a book overnight about who is Jesus. I think the book was called Who is Jesus? I picked it up from the night we were at Story. So yeah, I think I was excited, a bit nervous, but yeah.
And how did your life begin to change in the days, the weeks, the months following that?
It's probably a gradual change as I made more friends with people at church and just found out more about Jesus, learnt more about him because, I still had loads of questions to ask. So I was asking lots of questions. Probably one of the biggest changes was the amount of time I then spent at church and trying to develop these friendships and get to know people, get to know Jesus more. And my attachment to my grades and my worry about writing all these notes and doing so well at exams kind of went away slightly, because I knew then that the satisfaction of grades is really temporary, but also if I failed my exam, it doesn't change what Jesus thinks of me. He still loves me exactly the same. If I pass my exam, doesn't change what he thinks of me. He still loves me just the same. So I think having that comfort meant that I didn't hold so much on passing those exams.
And from coming to the event to making that decision, how did your understanding of God and faith change?
Yeah. So initially, looking at the Bible, I think I saw it as a bit of a rule book to start with, and I was thinking, there are things that Christians do and there are things that Christians don't do, and I'd quite like a list of everything, so then I don't do the things that we're not meant to do, and that I tick all the boxes. And I really wanted to know so that I didn't kind of go do something that wasn't Christian. But then I think chatting that kind of thing through with friends and reading the Bible more helped me to see that it wasn't about my behaviour, but it was more about a relationship with Jesus, and that the Bible was less kind of telling me, do this, don't do this, but more the Bible is God's word. So it's Jesus teaching me how to live for him. And it's more of a slower process of getting to know him and making mistakes, making lots and lots of mistakes, but knowing that each time he's going to forgive me for them. So yeah, my view of like the Bible changed definitely.
And you mentioned there this relationship with Jesus. What for you was the most attractive thing about the person of Jesus?
I think it was this love that I couldn't quite understand. How he could love somebody so much to give up his life, and just thinking how little I deserved it, but how freely he gave it, and the freedom that gave me to know that I am like deeply loved by Jesus. No, he knows like my heart. He knows all the bad things about me, every single thought, but that doesn't change what he thinks of me. I think that was, the most attractive thing.
Do you still have questions?
Loads of questions. I always have questions. But more to find out more about who Jesus is, more about his character, and about kind of God's plan for the world, and just finding out more about Christianity rather than doubting whether it's true. I think now, I'm convinced that that Jesus did rise from the dead, and like the impact that has on our lives, that it means that I'm saved from this punishment. So I think the questions, are more finding out more about Jesus.
And looking back, what would you say was the hardest thing about making that decision?
Probably the thought of keeping doing things wrong, that I wasn't going to get it right. And every day still now, I'll be trying to live how God wants me to live, but failing every single day. And then there's kind of like the frustration with yourself, like, I did this yesterday. Why hasn't it? Why haven't I got it right today? But I think that just helps me see that I'm not going to be perfect, and helps me see my weakness and how much I need Jesus.
And so this all happens at uni, and then you move home. How was that, having made this decision in Durham, then moving back?
Bit scary to move back now, because by that point, I really settled into Durham. I still wasn't enjoying my course, so I knew it was the right thing to do, to go and kind of change. But I was like comfortable in Durham, and I knew I had Christians around me to answer all my questions all the time, and a church that I'd kind of just settled into. So then going home, I had to find a new church and work out what it was going to be like to live as a Christian with no other Christians around me, in terms of like work and at home. I had a look for a church, and now I've settled into a nice church which I enjoy. I think it's just working out day by day how what it looks like to live as a Christian in a non-Christian family, and how I can be loving towards my parents, and it's just like working out what that looks like, which is still going to take time.
And you talked a lot about sort of academic and study and what that looked like when you were growing up. Obviously, you're got a job and you're still studying. What does that look like now?
So I think how I described before my view on exams after becoming a Christian, I don't hold them as highly. But I know my exams are what. So the exams that I'm doing, if I pass them, then I keep my job. So I know that they're important, and I know that I've got to put hard work into them. But if I do fail them, I know that God's plan is so much bigger for my life and for where He's going to take me. So if I fail, it's not the end of the world. It's all right.
And I know in the last couple of years, things haven't necessarily been straightforward. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the last year, I've been really struggling with depression, which I think kind of took me by surprise. I didn't really understand it when I first kind of, started feeling depressed. Didn't know how to explain it to people, so I didn't explain it to anyone. I think, just at the times, I'm sure like many people would be able to relate to kind of when you can't find the motivation to do anything, you're upset but you don't know why. Kind of hard to get your head around, like not being able to get out of bed because you can't kind of put your mind to anything. That like things don't feel like they have a point, a purpose, and not even being able to, like feeling like you can reach out to somebody because it's hard to put your mind to it, or you don't know what to say because you don't know why you're upset. So it's not like you can say, this sad thing's happened, so this is why I'm sad, because you don't know why. I found it's like affected work a bit as well with concentration, like hard to concentrate on study, on my work. So just been working out kind of how to deal with that over the past year.
And what difference does your relationship with Jesus have to the challenges you face with all that? Just helps so much. I think without Jesus, at those times where I feel really kind of alone, and not knowing who to speak to or where to go to, knowing Jesus means that I know that he's with me. I know that I can talk to him at any point and he's there listening. And also I know that he understands. So in the Bible where it talks about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before he's put on the cross, and his soul is troubled to the point of death, he experiences depression unlike we could ever imagine experiencing it. And so he knows how I'm feeling. So it's kind of having the presence of Jesus and also the hope that he promises of, for those that know him, we will have eternity with him, where there's going to be no suffering, no mental health issues, no cancer, and he will wipe every tear from our eyes. So I think in those times, I think I was trying to explain it to you earlier in that, so like if you had an exam on Monday and your friends were all going out on Friday and you had to make that decision, like I know I should work for my exam on Monday, so I give up going out with my friends on Friday because I know that it's only temporary, and on the Monday I'll get the reward of like the exam will be finished and I can go and spend time with my friends. I think it's like that in those times where it seems like I like really, really hard, not really knowing what to do. I know that it's only temporary, and I have the hope of where I'm going and being with Jesus afterwards, and that he's promised that. So yes, it's really, really hard now, but there is a hope. And for people who are perhaps here like you were 2 years ago and are exploring faith or grappling with some really big questions, what would you say to them? Keep asking lots of questions. No question is a silly question. I just think it's so important, like what we've been talking about. If it is true and Jesus did die on the cross, rise from the dead to save us from this punishment that we deserve because we turn away from him, that's so important. And so it's important to keep asking questions and to think for yourself whether you think it's of no importance or of infinite importance. But yeah, maybe open the Bible, see for yourself kind of who Jesus is, read a gospel. Keep asking questions and don't write it off as like, oh, this isn't applicable for me. Maybe think, what if this is true? What would that mean? And my final question, who is Jesus to you today? So my best friend, somebody who I can talk to about anything and who understands me better than I understand myself. Who's always there to listen and who loves me more than I know and more than I can give love back. But that doesn't matter to him. It's just like
his love is unchanging, just like no matter what I do, and also my saviour. So he took my place on the cross. He took my punishment, and I think like the verse that describes it best in the Bible, I think, is Romans 5:8, where it says, "For God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." So his love was so big that he died for us whilst we were rejecting him. He didn't die for us because we were trying really hard to follow him, or because we'd done loads of good things and we were walking away from him and we were saying, we don't choose you, we choose ourselves. And his love for us was so huge that he died for us.
Thank you so much. Let's give Sophie a round of applause. And I'm going to invite Naomi back on stage.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nat and Sophie. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. So we've got some cakes and things that the guys at the back are ready to bring round. So stay where you are and enjoy some cake for 5 minutes, and we'll see you in a bit. Hi guys, so sorry to interrupt your conversations. I hope you're enjoying your cakes and things. If you want to grab your seats again, and we'll get started. Fab. Yeah, fab. So, just while you're coming back to your seats and finding your friends again, having heard a great story from Sophie about her experiences of faith and her journey that she's been on, we're going to take some time together now to actually look at what the Bible has to say, to see what Jesus says about our humanity and how it applies to our lives. And so, as I said before, if this is your first human event or it is your 10th, if you're, however you're feeling today, whether you have never seen anything from the Bible before, whether you know it well, it would be really, really good to just engage, listen, read what is written and listen to what is said, to think for yourself, to challenge it if you like, and to talk about it afterwards. This week we have had the pleasure of having a guy called Mark with us to guide us through some of Jesus' teachings. So I'm going to invite Mark up. Hi, Mark. Couldn't see you there. Fab. So each night we've been learning something new about Mark. We have learnt so far that he is a Londoner, born and bred, that he works he works for a Christian charity, that he has lived in Uganda, Malaysia, Sheffield, London, that he has 2 kids and a wife, and that's the end of my list. So Mark, having spent a whole 5 days with us here in Durham, not a Durham student yourself, but what can I was. What can you tell us about what you've learned about Durham students and student life, as we were discussing earlier?
Well, it feels like a long time since I was a student, but I think the student spirit lives on. But I think I've noticed that if you put a tent in the middle of a really random field in the middle of winter and offer free food, people turn up. It's quite bizarre. I guess, don't look a gift horse in the mouth, that kind of thing.
Fair enough, that's great. So, each night this week, Mark has been with us, and he has been looking at a different short story that Jesus told from the book of Luke, which you should have a copy of in front of you on your tables or under your chairs. You may either have the little blue version, or there's also one, it's like a little black version with a picture of some lights on it. So if you just grab that, it's just to explain what it is. It's a historical account. It's a biography of Jesus' life written by a guy called Luke, surprise, surprise, and he basically met with people who are eyewitnesses of Jesus and wrote this book about the stories and the things that he did. So if you're in the blue books, if you could turn to page 33, and if you're in the black books, it's page 60. We're looking at the parable of the rich fool. So page 33 in the blue books and 60 in the black books. And you'll see sort of a subtitle that says The Parable of the Rich Fool. I'll read it out for us.
Someone in the crowd said to him, Jesus that is, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much indeed. Is your degree worth it? Is your degree worth it? Just earlier this month, I don't know whether you noticed in the news, but the chairman of the Commons Education Select Committee announced that many graduates in the UK receive what he called paltry returns for their degree, with between a fifth and a third of graduates taking non-graduate jobs, whatever they are. Now, of course, this sort of caused a bit of a fuss, and various people felt the need to respond, and university authorities particularly countered this by insisting that degrees remained an excellent investment. That was one of the official spokespeople. Well, of course they said that. They'd be out of business if it wasn't. Is your degree worth it? Well, for starters, I think it makes the classic category mistake of assuming value can only be measured economically. Obviously, some go to university as the shortcut to huge bank balances. There are some people who've really sort of figured it all out and plotted a trajectory through their lives, ending with a huge bank account. But there are all kinds of other reasons why people go to university that make it valuable and good. To have fun, that's good. To make lifelong friends, that's certainly happened. I have, from my uni times. To learn interesting stuff, I certainly did. I hope you are. Play sport, get involved in societies, all kinds of different things. You name it, all these things, I would suggest, and I'm sure you'd agree, make university worth it. It's not just about the salary. But I guess, however we look at it, there's still a sense of an investment. We're here to invest in our lives. We go to invest in our future. But there you go, using economic language to measure it. We can't get away from it. The whole of the modern world seems to reduce everything to economic value, and investment itself is an economic idea. It's hard to avoid. Well, while at the height of his fame, Pablo Picasso commissioned a cabinet maker to make a mahogany wardrobe for his French chateau. And to show what he was after, he had quite a specific idea in mind. So he scribbled a few sketches on a piece of paper just to give an idea, and he handed it to the craftsman and then asked, well, how much are you going to charge? To which the cabinet maker replied, "Nothing at all. Just make sure you sign the sketch," which was a very wise investment indeed, as it turned out. Now, it may come as a bit of a surprise that Jesus was also into wise investment. He wanted people to be wise, to make a wise investment in their lives. And in the last of this week's short stories, we've been each night taking a little section out of, if you like, Jesus' short story collection. In the last of them tonight, we find that Jesus insists that we should all plan for our future. We should all work out what matters to us. We should figure out what is of value. But it's not in quite the way that many of us expect. In tonight's short story, we focus just on two characters, some of the previous ones we've looked at have been a bit more complex and involved. But this one's very simple. And we focus on two characters, one real, a rich man's brother, as we're going to discover, and one fictional, a wealthy farmer who's done rather well for himself. But they've both fallen into the same trap. It's what I've called the trap of the saga mentality. Now, I realize this is a very long way off. This is more the sorts of things that your parents and grandparents are involved and interested in. But I don't know whether you realize, but the saga group of companies have been incredibly successful at gearing all their business to the over 50s. I realize this is not quite where you're at. But as the UK's average age just keeps going up, they've seen the potential of the so-called grey pound. People with time and pockets that can afford cruises, experiences, and a very comfortable life. Thank you very much. But most people would think, fair enough. They've worked hard. Now it's time for a decent rest. It's what they deserve. Perhaps that's what you aspire to, even now. I mean, Sophie was talking a little bit about that as she was expecting in her degree to lead to, a successful life and a bank balance and healthy retirement in the end, I guess. Why call that a trap? Well, Naomi read the story. As a man in the crowd comes up to Jesus, he's clearly got a bee in his bonnet. At the start of chapter 12, just before our bit, there's been such a huge crowd that's sort of desperate to get to the big man, to meet Jesus, that they're sort of trampling all over one another. It's a pretty frightening and desperate situation. And we can only assume, therefore, that this guy who makes it to the front, makes it to Jesus, well, he was probably a pretty useful rugby prop forward, don't you think? Very, very useful elbows. So here he is. He's grabbed the attention of the most influential man in human history. Now that kind of opportunity doesn't happen every day. So what does he use this for? Do you see there in the little number 13, verse 13? Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Wow. I mean, you've got the master, you've caught his eye, you've got time to ask any question you like. And that's what he asked for. Well, give him his due. He evidently respects Jesus as a religious leader, an authority figure. And he's probably a devout person too, I guess. He's doing it right. He's going to see the rabbi. That's what you do in a dispute. But what a thing to ask. After all, it was common in the ancient world for families all to live together, precisely to prevent estates being sort of broken up through the generations. And so in all probability, he and his brother were living under the same roof. He's actually seeking financial independence, presumably to step out on his own. Jesus is pretty blunt with him, isn't he? Actually, as you might expect. Is this really my job, is the gist? Surely he's got better things to do than worry about this sort of family dispute. But he actually uses this. Well, it's not really a question, it's a command, isn't it? He uses this opportunity to show that he sees what's really going on in this man's mind. Do you see there in verse 15? Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. He would utterly reject that old sort of bumper sticker, maybe you've seen it. He who dies with the most toys wins. Jesus says, watch out. Oh, perhaps you're thinking, here he goes. A typical Christian not living in the real world, always sort of downing the things that actually we need to invest in to survive in life. What is this? So Jesus tells a story about the real world. It's about a rich farmer, I guess the ancient world's equivalent of a venture capitalist. Very risky, but get it right, the returns are pretty nice, thank you. Just like venture capitalists, farmers need luck. A lot depends on the weather and all kinds of other things. But this guy, he's done well. He's already got land, but this year his luck was really in. A bumper harvest, huge returns. He's doing very well. Now, the big issue, the big question now is what on earth does he do with all this harvest available to him? I mean, he's got all this grain and stuff. He's going to have to store it. He's got to protect his investment. I mean, that is the perennial problem of the rich, isn't it? I realize that Cecil Rhodes is not actually sort of flavor of the month, and rightly so. He's certainly a controversial figure. He was the guy, if you remember, a couple of years ago that all the controversy about the statue in Oxford revolved around. He made a mint. He made millions in southern Africa under the British Empire, investing in diamond mines and gold, and frankly, basically exploitation of the people and the resources of southern Africa. 2 countries ended up being named for him, Rhodesia. A journalist once asked him towards the end of his life, asked him if he was happy. He was the master of all he surveyed. I mean, basically, he pretty much owned these colonies. Happy? No, of course not. I've spent my life amassing a fortune only to find that I've spent half of it on doctors to keep me out of the grave and the other half on lawyers to keep me out of the jail. Happy? Well, in our story, in Jesus' story, there are no financial advisors on hand here, just common sense. Tear down the old storehouses, build bigger barns. In other words, move assets to a more secure location, perhaps a bit like moving funds to Swiss bank accounts. It costs a bit more, but there's better service, better security, better peace of mind. You can almost hear the adverts, can't you? Build bigger barns. But what's it all for? Listen to the farmer's actual words. Just have a look down there, could you? See what he actually says. Just see as I read it out again, just see if you notice where the emphasis lies. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Do you see? It's all me, me, me. Fair enough. Didn't he work for it? I mean, I have farmers in my family. I know what a slog. Even with all kinds of modern machinery and contraptions, I know what a real slog being a farmer is. So I don't doubt this guy was a hard worker. But hang on. Weren't there other people around him? Does he live on an island? Doesn't he have responsibilities for others, those perhaps even less well off? It reminds me of another bumper sticker I saw. This was on a very nice Jaguar. It said, living free and easy, spending the kids' inheritance. Well, that's the trap of the saga mentality, isn't it? Live it up. Not in the heady days of youth, but in the autumn years of life. Then you've got the maturity and the means to enjoy it. I guess there are some here who might be thinking, I'm prepared to put in the hours, put in the years for that R&R at the end. One day, a rather sour millionaire was visiting a rabbi who took the rich man, to the window and said, what do you see out on the street? And the millionaire replied, men, women, and children. Then the rabbi led him to a mirror. Now, what do you see in the mirror? Myself, the obvious reply. Then the rabbi said, look, in the window there is glass. In this mirror there is also glass, but the glass of the mirror is coated in a little silver. And no sooner is the silver added than you cease to see others, only yourself. That could certainly be said of this farmer. That's all he's concerned with, himself. But hang on, what's so bad about that? Well, why this talk of a trap? Surely it's just wise investment. He's got a good business plan. He's doing the right thing. Well, at this point, Jesus' story takes a very brutal turn, but please note the brutality of the story does not result from the storyteller's cruel imagination. It's not Jesus trying to figure out a nasty way to twist it. No, the brutality did not derive from that, but from just the simple realities of life. Because you see, the trap of the saga mentality is exposed by the fact of certain mortality. The farmer gets up from his desk. He surveys his study. I guess it's covered in scattered sketches of new barn designs he's been figuring out, and he's going to get the best design in the post to the architect in the morning. And a rather smug, self-satisfied grin just creeps across his face as he contemplates the different possibilities. Because, of course, you don't want to just have a barn. What about a swimming pool? I mean, the Palestinian sun can get pretty brutal. What about a cruise or two? Ah, yes, definitely a 4-door Jag with iPads fit into each seat. Not that he's going to let anyone into his car, that is, but it's just nice to have. And then suddenly his grin contorts into a grimace. A flashing pain sears across his chest, and he reaches out to grab whatever he can lay his hands on. And as he falls to his knees, gasping for breath, he scrunches up one of those architectural sketches in his vain hope that it'll break his fall. Dead on arrival was the coroner's report, a pulmonary embolism. But you see, he'd known it was coming. Just have a look at verse 20. God had said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself?" We've no idea who will be in the will. I mean, nobody else has been mentioned. Maybe he has a family who will get it. Maybe he doesn't. Who knows? Now, please, Jesus is not saying that wealth is wrong. I don't think he's even saying that planning for the future is wrong. It's simply that this farmer and presumably the man that Jesus is talking to in the crowd both fail to see the futility of trusting money as their ultimate hope. Jesus' verdicts are like sort of bookends to the parable. They're two traps of materialism, you could put it like this. In verse 15, having things, lots of things, doesn't make life more meaningful. And then verse 20, having lots of things doesn't make death less inevitable. Just 2 or 3 years ago or so, I don't know whether you visited it, but in Selfridges in London, had some very sort of postmodern advertising. They hired the well-known artist, American artist Barbara Kruger, for 3 consecutive years for their January sales. And she's a genius known for her art with sort of bold slogans, and you probably may have seen some of it. And this is what she did for this campaign. "Buy me, I'll change your life," says one sign. "I shop, therefore I am," says another. Then there's, "It's you, it's new, it's everything, it's nothing." And another sign says, "Plenty ought to be enough." It's pretty in your face, isn't it? It's very sort of subversive, and it's actually a sort of subtle game. I mean, this is one of the premier flagship sort of department stores in London, almost sort of pulling the rug from under its own feet. And yet the joke is on us, because we'll still go there to shop. We know that they know that we know that they know that we know that life isn't all about shopping, and yet we'll still go shopping. Or are they just being sneaky? Because, of course, if people didn't shop there, the place would shut. Most people, I guess, would never be so crass as to say life is about shopping. But if it isn't, well, frankly, what else is it about? What do we live for? What makes life have meaning? What about the rest of our life? But who am I to write off wealth just like that? Who am I to say that you can't have nice things? After all, I'm quite keen on my iPad and my car and various other things. Which is why verse 20 provides the ultimate and irrefutable verdict on what matters. The man dies, his riches get him nowhere. His pension plans, his saga holiday dreams crumple to the ground with him. What good was his wealth now? Who would get it? Louis B. Mayer was an incredibly wealthy film magnate in the early days of Hollywood. He co-founded MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. And a colleague was trying to persuade him to give some money to charity, or to a particular charity, in fact. And the friend said to him, "You can't take it with you, you know." Mayer replied, "Well, in that case, I'm not going." A good gag, all very well. But that's just daydream thinking, not reality. He did go. He's dead. Who's being naive now? But the most devastating verdict here comes not from the mere fact of this man's death, but from the fact that God calls him a fool. Which is rather a surprise. You don't expect God to get insulting, do you? You see, fool, actually in the Bible, is a kind of technical term. I suppose you could call it a technical insult. To be called a fool is not so much just a sort of random thought, but it's almost a theological term. One of the ancient songs of the Bible, the Psalms, that come from the Psalms, says this: "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." That's the definition of a fool, according to the Bible, according to God. Well, of course, if God exists, then to reject his reality is folly, isn't it? I mean, there's a logic to it, at least. The little thumbnail sketch of the farmer says it all, doesn't it? It's all me, me, me. Where's the sense of life being about more than pleasure and self-gratification? Nowhere. Where's his acknowledgement of others and their needs? Nowhere. Most seriously, though, where's the gratitude to God who made the world and made the fields and the crops in the first place? Nowhere. This man may have been religious. In fact, it's highly likely given the sort of place and time in history. He may even have gone through all the sort of religious motions, been to synagogue, gone to the temple even maybe. But to all intents and purposes, you see that he was a functional atheist. He might have said that God exists, but he was a functional atheist. Actually, Sophie said something on those lines, didn't she? If she was asked when she was much younger who Jesus was, and she said, well, I suppose the correct answer is Son of God or something. But that made no difference to her life. This man was a functional atheist. He perhaps believed in God, but he lived for himself. Here's the irony. He's an investor, but he's not invested in the things that matter. You see, Jesus is not saying it's wrong to plan for the future. The farmer simply didn't plan far enough into the future. He hadn't planned for after death. Look at verse 21. This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God. So the big question as I conclude this week, draw these short stories together, the big question is, how do I become rich towards God? I mean, that's a sort of odd phrase. I guess Jesus is sort of just applying the metaphor, the image of the story. What does that mean? Well, before answering, notice the implication. The farmer doesn't simply die. Verse 20 says his life was demanded of him. He'd face God and be held to account for how he'd lived his life. And the uncomfortable reality is that even if he had suddenly turned over a new leaf at the last minute and suddenly become very generous, that wouldn't have changed his past. He'd still have to give an account for that. He'd still have to explain why he'd lived in God's world as if it was his own, with all the gifts and wonders that it has, and not even shown a nod of appreciation to the Maker. Nor actually, to be fair, would it have made any difference if he'd been poor. There are plenty of poor people who don't give God much notice. No, what makes somebody rich towards God is a relationship with God, a friendship restored through forgiveness that he offers, forgiveness for our independence, a forgiveness that Jesus, as Sophie was saying a bit earlier, died on the cross to bring. And when, or rather if, we have received Jesus' forgiveness, we will realize that the value of that relationship far outweighs the value of a very full Swiss bank account. The money might be useful. Who knows? Money can do all kinds of great things as well as terrible things. But knowing Jesus means knowing treasure that is far greater, because it both makes life meaningful and makes death incidental. Building bigger barns does not do that. Because once you've built your bigger barn and sat back for a bit to admire it, you begin to think, actually, it could do with a few improvements. I mean, what about an extension on the north side? And you know, this is, well, we could have 2 pools. John D. Rockefeller, one of the sort of robber barons of the early 20th century in the United States, was once asked, how much is enough money? His answer was, the next million. Material wealth really isn't everything. Success really isn't everything. Malcolm Muggeridge was a brilliant journalist, died just 20 years ago or so, a bit more. One of the great literary figures of his day, very brilliant man, done all kinds of things. And he wrote this towards the end of his life. He said, I may, I suppose, regard myself or pass myself for being a relatively successful man. People occasionally stare at me in the streets. That's fame. I can fairly easily earn enough to qualify for admission to the higher slopes of the Inland Revenue. That's success. furnished with money and a little fame, and even the elderly, if they care to, can enjoy trendy diversions. That's pleasure. It might happen once in a while that something I said or wrote was sufficiently heated for me to persuade myself that it represented a serious contribution and impact on our times. That's fulfillment. Yet I say to you, and I beg you to believe me, multiply these tiny triumphs by 1,000,000, add them all together, and they are nothing. Less than nothing, a positive impediment, in fact, measured against one draught of that living water that Jesus Christ offers to the spiritually thirsty, irrespective of who or what they are. So my appeal tonight as I close is very simple. And I mean it very sincerely. Please, please, please avoid God's final verdict. After a life invested in perhaps good things, but not eternal things. Please don't find yourself at the end with the words, "You fool," ringing in your ears. You fool. Instead, become rich towards God. That's what this whole week's been about. Different angles on it, different facets. As I did last night, I want to give the chance for some to do just that. But many, I would imagine, are not ready. Maybe, this week has been a complete sort of eye-opener. You never heard anything like it. Never even dreamt that actually there might be something to take seriously or listen to in this Christianity stuff. Well, that is absolutely fine. If you're not ready, you're not ready. You don't really know what to think. Well, keep inquiring, chewing on it, asking, teasing it. You give the Christians you know a hard time. You have my permission. Give them a hard time. Why do you believe this stuff? It's good for them. Sign up for the search. We'll hear more about that in a moment. Take your time. But all I ask, as I said last night, is have integrity in your search. Don't let sitting on the fence be an excuse, because that by itself is a choice. But others may be all too conscious of having lived as functional atheists, living in God's world without dependence upon God, without gratitude to God, without even a nod in his direction. But you want to do something about it. Well, for a few, that's a scary thing. Sophie found it scary. Of course it's scary. It's a step into a new future. Not complete unknown. It's not a complete stab in the dark. That's not what faith is. Faith is reasoned and thought through trust in Jesus. So it's not completely into the dark. And sometimes you need a little bit of help with that. I certainly did. There are no magic words, there's no formula. I've just got a suggestion. And so that I'm not putting words into your mouth, I'm going to put the words up on the screen and read through them first. If you agree with it, then I'm going to pray it through again after that. Pray silently with me. If you don't agree with it, that's fine. You don't have to do anything. All I would ask is just think about it. So this is what I'm going to pray in just a second. Lord God, I'm so sorry I have not loved you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I understand now who Jesus is and why he died. I know that I do not deserve it, but because of Jesus' death on the cross for me, I ask you to forgive me. From now on, please give me the desire to obey you and help me to follow Jesus, whatever the cost. Well, just to respect those who want to do that with me, let's have a moment of quiet and bow our heads, either for contemplation and thought or to pray, to echo it with me. So let's pray. Lord God, I am so sorry that I have not loved you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I understand now who Jesus is and why he died. I know that I do not deserve it, but because of Jesus' death on a cross for me, I ask you to forgive me. From now on, please give me the desire to obey you and help me to follow Jesus, whatever the cost. Amen. If that was you, I would love to meet you. I'd love to find out your name so that I can pray for you and give you a book. It's good to tell somebody. If you don't want to come up to the front, I understand. Make sure you tell somebody, but I would love to meet you. But, regardless of whether that was you specifically, I'm thrilled you've been here tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your patience in listening so attentively and politely and quietly. I've loved being here in Durham this week. It's been a real highlight for me. Thank you very much to the CU for your hospitality and for all the efforts in putting on this incredible sequence of events. But thank you very much for coming. Good night.